Hey, so this is another video, and this one's about router security. So routers are basically, on the inside, it's a tiny ARM computer. ARM like ARM, like the computers that are in your cell phones and tablets. But with, limited capabilities. So it's got a bunch of network interfaces and a web GUI, and that's what you see here, and that's about it. And unfortunately, they're usually not updated very often. And the problem with that is because your router is your gateway to the internet, if there's a security vulnerability, it makes everything inside of your home vulnerable. And so when there are updates, you should do them. They call them firmware updates rather than software updates, but it's the same thing. It's the software that runs on the system. Usually if you open them up, you'll see one little system on a chip, which includes the processor itself, and I think usually, I shouldn't say that, sometimes includes the network interface chip. You may have a separate network interface chip, usually a small amount of memory and a small amount of storage. And by small amount, I mean maybe 256 megabytes of memory and maybe 32 megabytes of storage, 64 megabytes, something like that. So they're really underwhelming underpowered computers, but they have a set job. And they normally run some version of Linux that's been custom made to run on that router. So again, software updates are important, but unfortunately they don't happen very often. So what you should do, first off, is go into your router. And normally you can type in 192.168.1.1, or there's a couple of different possible options. So 0.2.1 or 0.1.1 or 0.0.1 or what's the other one, 0.1.0. Normally it's one of those. Now sometimes it'll be something different, and if so, it'll normally tell you in the paperwork that comes with your router anyways. And if not, you can search for it. So like you can type in like if you had, this is an old Linksys WRT54G is an old type of router, and it's a really recognizable one. Actually, it's this. They were everywhere 10 years ago. And so you can find pretty quickly and easily the default address. But then you also need to know what the login is. And normally the login is like admin for the username and then something for the password. Sometimes it's blank, sometimes it's admin, sometimes it's like Turkcell or TTNet1 or something like that. Sometimes it's something that's just totally off the wall, in which case it's normally printed on the sticker on the back of the router or in the box or with the paperwork, something like that. So when you buy a router, it's usually pretty important that you keep that information, keep the box, keep the paperwork. But you can also usually find the defaults online. So once you've logged in order to update it, you'll want to find the maintenance section. And pretty much every router is going to have something that's a maintenance section. So here, for instance, this is my one router, and you can see it's got some LAN info, Wi-Fi info, guest Wi-Fi info, some other system info, connectivity, parental control. But when I click over here, I can come down here to maintenance. Oh, and of course I got to log back in. It'll time out after a couple of minutes as well. So if I come over here to maintenance, you can come to, the first thing I would do is go to backup restore and do backup. And when you click it, all it will do is download a simple file. So that file contains all of the settings. It's basically a mirror image of the settings that are on your device right now. And the reason you want to do that is if you mess something up with the firmware, or if you for some reason lose that, you can load it back in by coming back in here and doing restore. But you can come here to firmware upgrade, and this is where you would install new firmware. Now you can see the current firmware version is this, and I think it's the latest, but if you're not certain, you can type this into Google. And here's the thing, if you're looking for firmware for your router, only get it from the manufacturer's website. So let's see if we can find a new one. I doubt that we can. but we'll look. So download library, which one is this? 1312B10D, and let's see if it shows anything. 1312B10D, so that's 513AAXA7C0. 513AAXA.10C0. I think mine is actually newer than that. 511, 513, 513457, and mine is 10. So once you get that, so I'm not going to install it, but let's say I were going to, you would download it. Download. I don't want to open an app. Why is it asking me to open an app to download? Let's try this one. Download. I don't know why it's asking me that, but something might be up with this download. Maybe that's the reason why. Let me try a different one. Download. So at any rate, you would download the file. Because it's an FTP site, it's probably just taking forever because FTP tends to be kind of slow. So you can see this is a zip folder. So you would download that, right-click the zip folder and do extract all, so that you've got just a folder. And in there, there's usually a couple of different files. If I can get one of them, I can show you. I don't know why, but for whatever reason, it's just not allowing me to download it. Let's see if we can get to the FTP site in general. Yeah, their FTP site might be down or something like that. I'm not certain. But that's the case with routers. I mean, getting software from them can be difficult. And sometimes you'll find that there is no updated software. Let me see if there is an update for this one. HG255S. So this other one that I have is Huawei. Finding the firmware can oftentimes be the biggest problem. So at any rate, oh, is it there? There's something. Oh, this is annoying. I'm just going to download one of these, any of these if I can find it. So at any rate, what you'll get is a zip file and you extract it and you'll have a couple of files in there. And once you've got those files, you can come here and do choose file and select that file. And it will be in the extracted folder. And usually it's .rom or .bin, ROM or bin. You notice this shows all files. It'll accept any file. But if you put the wrong file in there, it will give you an error. Now, once you've done that, you'll click upload. It will upload it, and it will usually give you a chance to cancel if you'd like to cancel if you're not sure about it. But you want to make certain that you have the right file for your hardware and the right revision file for the revision of your hardware. So, like if your hardware says HG255S Rev 2 instead of Rev 1, make sure you get Rev 2 because it can be quite different hardware in there. But at any rate, you'll do upload, follow the prompts. Afterwards, and that normally takes between 5 and 10 minutes to copy the firmware over into the device. It should save your settings, but if it doesn't save your settings, you've got that backup restore file anyways. So you can always put that backup restore file back in there by opening it up and doing restore and restoring the configuration by choosing the file. I'm going to cancel it, but choosing the file and uploading that configuration afterwards. So that's what this Zyxel one looks like. If we look at this Huawei one, here's the home. I log in. If I come again to maintain, and let me see, where is it? Tools. Device management. Yeah, device management. Firmware update. And again, you would choose the file and do upgrade. And in this one, let's see if there is a place for me to download the settings. There probably is a place to download the settings in here, though I don't see it. But at any rate, once you've uploaded that firmware file, it'll take, again, 5 to 10 minutes to do the upload and to write the firmware to the device. Because remember, these are really slow. We're talking like 5 to 700 megahertz single or dual core ARM processors. Like, think of like Motorola Razr speed, basically, in terms of the computers that are inside of them, the chips that are inside of them. And then it will reboot. And after it reboots, it should come back up. Now, it might look quite different. So for instance, when I installed this firmware here, the current firmware that's on this Zyxel router, it changed it. Originally, it was this ugly, old-looking blue interface, and now it's this somewhat nicer, more modern Metro-looking interface. With the Huawei router, after I upgraded it, there was no difference. It looked exactly the same, but it might look different. At any rate, you should be able to log back in, and you should be able to see all of your settings the same. And in here, the settings were the same. They were just in slightly different places. They just looked a little bit different. So, you know, like my settings, I would come over here to find the settings rather than go, I forget what the original one looked like, but I think on the original interface, the settings were down at the bottom. So at that point, you'll have updated your router. You should be good to go. Test everything, of course. And there is a reset button on your router as well. So if you need to reset it to the factory settings, you can do that. Just make sure that you know the settings that need to go in there first, or have a backup and restore file. Now the other thing to know, and I probably should have said this at the beginning, never update your router via Wi-Fi. So if you update it via Wi-Fi and that connection gets lost, especially while it's uploading the file itself, you can scramble the thing, you can brick it, you can ruin it. There's been lots of routers ruined in the world from somebody trying to update it using Wi-Fi. So always have your router hardwired, okay? So just to recap, first thing first, you put in the IP address of the router, usually 0.1, 1.1, 2.1, 1.2, 2.1, 2.0, basically any combination where those last two digits are 0, 1, or 2 might be it. But you can look it up if you need to online. Enter your username and password, go to the maintain section, upload the new driver file, the new firmware file, let it take its time. It might even look like it's freezing up after 3 or 4 minutes, but let it continue going. Usually there's a little status bar that tells you, and you know, if it tells you, then that's great. But if not, if it looks like it froze, don't go unplugging stuff, don't go turning stuff off, because you might well brick the machine from doing that. But I do recommend occasionally upgrading your router software if you can find the files, which again, usually like Linksys, firmware download. Usually you can look up the manufacturer, the model number, and then firmware download, and you can find some information on it. Usually, especially if it's a newer one. Some of the more new routers, newer than the ones that I have, can automatically download the firmware itself. So when you open up that maintain page, it'll just say check for new firmware. You can check for it, and then it will say either upload or update or something to that effect, and will allow you to do it from within the router software itself, and that's the way to do it if you can. Each router is different, and I only have a couple to show you, just sort of bits and pieces of what to do, but you really should update them when possible, because there are exploits, and those exploits will cause big issues if you end up getting a virus or malware or whatever, and they can be security problems where people can enter your home network without you even knowing it and wreak all sorts of havoc and turn on cameras and do all sorts of nasty things. So update your router software, and hopefully that helped a little bit. It's just kind of more of an explainer rather than a specific how-to. But yeah, you should become familiar with your router software though. That's sort of the point as well, because it's super important in terms of security and really performance too. And I mean, you pay for it when you pay for the internet. So, yeah. Anyways, hope this helps somebody. Enjoy.